morning, good afternoon, and welcome. We're so glad you're here for today's webinar, Evicting Children, How Babies Bear the Brunt of the Affordable Housing Crisis and What We Can Do About It. I am Erin Patterson. I'm Director of Education Initiatives with SchoolHouse Connection. And if you're not familiar with SchoolHouse, we're so glad that you joined us for this webinar today. I'll share more about who we are in just a moment. But first, I wanted to share some housekeeping and logistics reminders for our time together. This webinar will last 1 hour and 15 minutes for a 75-minute session today. We're going to ask that you please type your questions into the Q&A box on your control panel. That is where we will look when we have our Q&A portion at the end of today's webinar. And we encourage you to share your questions early and often throughout as you hear from our wonderful presenters today. A reminder that this session is being recorded. You will receive a copy of the recording as a follow-up email after today's session, and you can always find all of our archived webinars on the SchoolHouse Connection website, schoolhouseconnection.org. You will also be issued a certificate for attendance after the completion of today's webinar, and you'll also receive a copy of the slides as well. A little bit about SchoolHouse Connection. If you're not familiar with us, we are a national nonprofit advocacy organization. Our mission is overcoming homelessness through education from prenatal to post-secondary. We work at this mission in a number of ways, including policy advocacy at the federal and state levels. We offer a variety and range of practical assistance to state education agencies, local school districts, early childhood development programs, institutions of higher education, and others who are interested and dedicated in learning more about how to support children and youth experiencing homelessness. We always say the jewel in our crown is our network of young scholars who have experienced homelessness themselves and who we are privileged to support through scholarship assistance as well as case management support. We encourage you to check out our website, schoolhouseconnection.org. One of the features I love to call out is that we post a lot of questions from our inbox. So chances are, if you have a question about serving children and youth experiencing homelessness in your community, we've probably answered it for someone else. And so you can browse those questions on our website. Just a quick context setting before we launch into today's discussion. The reason we are coming together to talk about homelessness among babies, infants, and toddlers in particular is because homelessness has serious consequences, including that homelessness in infancy has been found to be associated with delays in language, literacy, and social emotional development, which puts children at risk for later academic problems. We also know that the younger and longer a child experiences homelessness, the greater the cumulative toll of negative health outcomes. And perhaps the strongest evidence we have for the academic impacts of homelessness is that the high school graduation rate for students experiencing homelessness is 68%, and this is compared to 85% for all students. It is notably important that this is the lowest graduation rate of any student subgroup, including economically disadvantaged students. And that is why we have put together a really phenomenal panel of experts for you today. We'll start first. I'll hand it over to Carl Gershenson with the Eviction Lab at Princeton University. And Carl, I invite you in to introduce yourself and walk us through your research.
Thank you very much, Erin, and thank you everyone for showing up today. I'm director of the Eviction Lab at Princeton University. We were founded by Professor Matt Desmond, author of books like Evicted in 2018, for reasons that I'll get to. And we are a group of scholars, researchers committed to documenting the prevalence and the impacts of housing insecurity in the United States. Before I go any further into this presentation, I do have this disclaimer on the screen. I'm going to talk about research that we did in collaboration with some colleagues at the United States Census Bureau. And so it's important to state that while all of our research has been peer-reviewed by the Census Bureau and gone through all of their disclosure review processes, nothing I say represents, the views of anyone at the census. So with that, next slide, please. So, we're going to talk today about rising costs of renting and evictions, especially among children in the United States. The theme of today's panel is youth homelessness, and of course, there are many pathways to homelessness, but a lot of those pathways involve at some point evictions. So some real, basic background facts about what's going on with the cost of housing in the US. Housing is the primary cost for most families. We say that if you're paying over 30% of your income towards housing, that you're rent burdened. But I often like thinking in terms of what do you have left over at the end of the month after you've paid for housing. And for extremely low income families, or even for families making $30,000 a year, I mean, that's like a $14 an hour job if you're working 40 hours a week, right? That's above minimum wage in a lot of places. In 2021, the median renter household making less than $30,000 a year had only $380 left at the end of each month after paying rent, right? That's $380 left for food, for clothing, for medical expenses. That's an incredibly thin line that these families are walking, especially if they have children. Next slide, please. And so it's no surprise that so many of these families are at constant risk of eviction, right? When you only have $380 left over each month, it just takes a little unexpected expense to push you over the edge. You miss rent a month or two, and you find yourself with an eviction filing. So at the lab, we put together statistics that estimate each year 2.7 million unique renter households receive an eviction filing. Next slide, please. Now, why is this important? Well, we are able to link evictions to a number of deleterious consequences. If we just think about material consequences, most obviously, families lose access to their homes, and in a lot of cases, their possessions, right? Possessions end up on the curb, ruined by rain, taken to a dump, or something like that. We have research that shows that people who experience an eviction are even 10 to 20% more likely to lose their jobs in the upcoming year due to the stress and the disruption of home and transportation routines associated with evictions. We can also show that evictions are associated with damage to credit scores. And even people who might be fortunate enough to have a small business, a lot of those businesses go under during the aftermath of the eviction. Socially, we can show that evictions disrupt community ties because you have to move to a new neighborhood. If you have children, evictions are associated with interfering with education, right? You're moving to a new school in the middle of the school year, disrupting relationships with teachers and so forth. And of course, evictions associated with increased risk of homelessness. I think that you could put homelessness under material, social, or health outcomes of evictions, but there are major social consequences of homelessness. Finally, we can really establish a causal link between evictions and all sorts of health outcomes. That includes physical and mental health issues like anxiety and depression. And the lab has a paper that we just published showing that people who experience eviction have a 40% increase in chances of early mortality compared to similar renters who did not experience an eviction. So this is a major social crisis, both in terms of the number of evictions filed each year, but also in terms of the severity of the consequences that households who experience an eviction go on and experience. Next slide, please. So given how major of a crisis evictions are, you might think that the federal government or any sort of public body is out there collecting data on evictions. It turns out this is not the case. There's no systematic collection of eviction case records by federal government, state government, or county government. So next slide, please. This is why the Eviction Lab was founded in 2018. Our initial mission was to create a publicly available national database of eviction records. I'm happy to say we succeeded. You can go to evictionlab.org and anyone can download these data or use some of our public interfaces. Like this is a picture of our map where you can go and look at how prevalent evictions are in your community. Now, how do we do this? Next slide. So, the evictions are not a discrete event. They're a drawn out process. It starts with the landlord delivering a notice to quit to tenants. After a certain amount of time has elapsed, the landlord then files an eviction case with the court. A hearing is scheduled, the hearing occurs, and then the judge issues a judgment. The vast majority of judgments are in favor of the landlord. And then the final step of an eviction is the enforcement, when law enforcement might come and remove a tenant and their belongings. Next slide, please. So of all of these stages, to generate data artifacts that our lab is able to collect and analyze and scale. That's the filing and the court decision or the judgment. So all of the statistics that you see on our website and all of the statistics I'm going to talk about in this presentation come from collecting these filings and judgments from courts. Now, I want to point out that this means that we are unable to observe the very large number of informal evictions which occur in this country each year. And there's really no way to estimate how common those are outside of survey research. But if we think that there's about 2.7 million unique households experiencing an eviction filing each year, we think that roughly there might be just as many households experiencing some kind of informal eviction during this time. Next slide. And so this is a picture of this is our estimates of eviction filing rates per county across the United States. The yellow is the hot spots here. Purple are relatively lower. You can see that evictions, they occur across the country, but they're especially concentrated in the eastern seaboard down into the southeastern United States and in parts of the Rust Belt, Michigan, upstate New York, Ohio, Indiana. But that said, there's really no part of the country that does not experience a high level of evictions, especially if we compare the eviction rate in even a California, Oregon, or Washington to peer countries, in the EU or Canada. One other point I want to make about this map before talking about our new research. Initially, we were only able to talk about eviction rates at this aggregate level. Like, this is how many evictions were happening in a county. And we can only say how many evictions are happening to each household, because there was no data in these eviction filing records that could tell us about how many people lived in that household, their race, their gender, or their age. So we had to come up with a way to study this. This is where we partnered with the United States Census Bureau. We were able to upload 100 million eviction records to census servers. We did this huge data linkage project that allowed us to finally say, not just how many households were getting evicted, how many individuals, and to give some sort of information about their demographic characteristics. Next slide. Actually, 2 slides, because this is what I just said. So we did that. We published this paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences with a number of my co-authors. You can go look this up if you're looking for more information. But this allowed us to estimate that there are 7.6 million people each year threatened with an eviction. And of those, for the first time, we get to definitively say 2.9 million children receive an eviction filing each year. Next slide. And we were also able to take this and create sort of a risk profile by age for evictions in the United States. This particular graphic was made by the New York Times, who wrote up this study. But what you're looking at here, you see at the top of this graph is the eviction filing rate, or sorry, the share of all evictions that are represented by each age group. You see that children 0 to 4 represent 12% of all people who receive an eviction filing rate each year. And in fact, that is the largest group of people receiving evictions each year, 0 to 4-year-olds. You can also see that risk decreases with age. So that risk is still very high for 5 to 9-year-olds, 10 to 14-year-olds, 15 to 19-year-olds. It goes up a little bit again around that 20 to 24, 25 to 29 age group. A lot of people are becoming parents at this age. And then once you hit your 30s, the share of the population begins decreasing until you see that there is a relative housing stability achieved once you get to around retiree age. Next slide, please. So in this pyramid, we've sort of taken the figure that you just saw and split it open by gender. So, we're still looking at this age distribution of eviction filing risk, but on the left, you have the risk for women of that age, and on the right, you have the risk of eviction for men of that age. And what I want to point out here is that if you look at eviction risk from ages around 20 to 40, you see that women are overrepresented relative to their share of the renter population, whereas men are underrepresented relative to their share of the renter population. And what seems to us, what's clearly going on here is that mothers are at elevated risk of eviction, right? If children are being evicted, there must be a parent or guardian with them. And in very many cases, this is mothers or a female guardian who is being evicted along with the children, whereas men are underrepresented. Next slide, please. And of course, there is a very severe racial element to this. On the left, we have eviction filing rates by age for all renters. And on the right, we have eviction filing rates by age for Black renters. So whereas around 10% of children receive an eviction filing each year, we estimate that it's over 1/4 of Black children who are receiving an eviction filing rate each year. And for Black babies and toddlers ages 0 to 4, I mean it's over 25%. So there's like 27 or 28%. So just incredibly high numbers for Black renters. We estimate that over 50% of evictions in this country are actually filed against a Black household, even though Black renters make up only about 20% of renters in this country. Now, why would this be? Of course, a lot has to do with the income and wealth distribution in this country. Of course, on average, Black households earn less than white households due to all sorts of reasons having to do with historic and contemporary racism. But next slide, please. This is not just about income. So these graphs, bear with me, they might take a little bit of explanation. But on the left, we have annual eviction filing rates for households with children. On the x-axis, moving along the bottom of that screen, we have household income. So these lines that you're looking at, are sort of going down and to the right, indicating that as your income gets higher, eviction risk goes down. Now that makes sense, but those purple lines at the top are the eviction filing rates for Black households with children. And then at the bottom, we have those yellow lines, those eviction filing rates for white households with children. And we see that Black households with children, even earning over $80,000 a year, still have eviction filing rates that are significantly higher than white households earning around $20,000 a year, right? It is not just income that's going on here. Black rental markets where Black renters tend to be concentrated and segregated operate on different rules, and they just tend to generate many more evictions than rental markets that serve white renters. Interestingly, if we look at the box on the right where there's no children present, there's no income. There's not much of an effect on income there. So this is telling me very clearly, if you give families with children more money, this increases their housing stability. I mean, that's telling me that there's a very straightforward solution to this problem in some way. Next slide. So I just want to summarize, because I just threw a lot of statistics at you, but what this collaboration between the eviction lab and the census has shown. 7.6 million people are threatened with eviction each year. Roughly 40% of people who are evicted are children. There are massive racial disparities in eviction. And we know that income will help stabilize these families, but it does not explain the size of those racial disparities. Next slide. And I just want to end with a brief overview of what's going on with eviction filing rates right now. During the pandemic, a number of emergency programs, there was an eviction moratorium. Of course, there's the child tax credit. There was emergency rental assistance. There was extended unemployment insurance. There were the stimulus checks. There was a lot of federal money directed towards people during the pandemic. And we saw eviction filing rates drop. relative to average. So if you see this, like these orange bars go down in March of 2020, they stay really low while there's the moratorium. And then as the federal assistance worked its way through the system, evictions slowly but surely crept back to where they were, so that in the year 2023, 2024, nationally evictions are exactly back to where they were before the pandemic, nationally. But we also know that rents went crazy in a lot of markets. So in a lot of Sunbelt markets where we do track data, so like if we're talking about Las Vegas, Phoenix, places in Florida, North Carolina, in a lot of those places, evictions are well higher than they were in 2019, 2020. We have, I think Las Vegas is like at 150% of average. So evictions remain a major problem, but we have evidence, we have solid evidence from the COVID era that active interventions into the rental market, especially the infusion of money, can really help out families in a pinch. So that's it for me. Thank you, everyone, and I look forward to your questions.
Carl, thank you so much. That was such a compelling overview of the problem that we're trying to address. And I want to thank our participants for submitting your questions already. I want to reassure you that we will get to those in just a few moments, and to please continue to use that Q&A box as we work our way through our next two presenters. Given the breadth and depth of the problem that Carl just laid out for us, I want to provide a little more context before I turn it over to Shayna, and remind our audience that there is one-time COVID relief funding available through the American Rescue Plan Homeless Children and Youth Funds. This was the result of a bipartisan amendment to the American Rescue Plan Act, and Congress appropriated $800 million to address the specific and unique impacts of the COVID pandemic on children and youth experiencing homelessness. These funds are known as ARP-HCY. They can be used flexibly to meet the educational and, importantly, the housing-related needs of children and youth who are experiencing homelessness. And they may also be used, just as regular education for homeless children and youth funds, they may also be used to serve children who are not yet school age, this birth to 5 segment of our population that we are describing today. Time is of the essence. These funds must be obligated by September of this year, September 30th, 2024. There is still time to use these funds impactfully, though, and that is our message, and that is why I'm so excited to turn it over to Shayna Carino from Akron Public Schools, who's going to tell us exactly how they are utilizing their American Rescue Plan Homeless Children and Youth Funds. Shayna, welcome.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you, SchoolHouse co-presenters for having me. I'm Shayna Carino. I am the McKinney-Vento liaison, or the homeless liaison, for Akron Public Schools. So what that means, our McKinney-Vento program's job is to remove any barriers to education that a family might have if they are without housing. And so what we do is we identify families who are experiencing homelessness and then begin to remove barriers to housing. Our mission here at Project Rise is to make sure that our Akron Public Schools homeless children and youth have the same educational opportunities as all students. Our district size is 20,000 students. In each year, we roughly identify about 2,000 students who are experiencing homelessness in our school district. Now, Erin had mentioned the ARP funds, the American Rescue Plan funds, and the reason that I was asked to present today is to talk a little bit about how we use those funds. Now, it is not normal for a McKinney-Vento program or a program like ours, or probably many of yours, to have enough funds to meet the needs of families. We're chronically underfunded. And so when we had access to American Rescue Plan funds, although we have the funds, there is a catch. They needed to be used in this 3-year time period. And so we had funds and they were on a limited time basis. And so our strategy to use these funds really revolved around obviously meeting some immediate basic needs for families, but we also wanted to have a strategy to have an impact long past our touch with the family. So if we're going to use funds on a family and we know that we only have access to them for a short time, we want to impact families long past the life of the funds. Go to the next slide. And so one of our initiatives to use the ARP funds was to have a partnership with our local community legal aid. We had already had a partnership with legal aid where we were sending referrals, but this partnership allowed us to pay attorney fees to remove housing barriers with legal remedies, which was huge. Our families were then prioritized. Their housing barriers that have legal remedies were prioritized, and then we were able to long-term impact these families and remove some of these barriers permanently. So some examples of the areas of law that we use most when we're working with our legal aid partnerships, they've helped us with evictions, they've helped families in family law areas, they've helped with expungements of criminal records, public benefits, immigration, tons of immigration, Social Security, taxes, and bankruptcy. Those were our most hit areas of law when we're using this partnership. And so I want to talk a little bit about the Memorandum of Understanding that was created between Legal Aid, Project Rise, and the different responsibilities of each party. Go to the next slide. And so there's you guys will have a copy of the slides, and the MOU that we created, there's a sample linked in the chat. But the responsibilities of legal aid, one was to provide some training for McKinney-Vento staff, some basic understanding of what legal barriers might exist. And so we have a little bit of an idea when we start working together, but we obviously know evictions, but they give us a training. And so we're able to do some basic legal assessments with families. And when we're talking to families, we can hear, oh, there might be a legal benefit or solution to your problem here. And so they provided training for our McKinney-Vento staff here in Akron Public Schools. We have 12 staff. They provided the attorneys, the paralegals to perform the legal services, and they would screen clients for other programs or funding sources. So this was big because the McKinney-Vento funds, again, are limited. Or the American Rescue Funds are limited. But if I referred a family who also happened to be a veteran and they had fundings for that subgroup, then they would use the funding on, they would use funding or split funding between two pots, which was super helpful. They're responsible for client communication with the clients, and they're collecting data and still continuing to collect data on the families that they're working with. Next slide. And then our responsibilities as a McKinney-Vento program, Project Rise, is we're responsible for the obligations of the American Rescue Plan grant. And so it's our job to manage all of that funding and the responsibilities of the grant, to provide referrals for the families and to screen families for any legal housing barriers and communicate with the families. That became big if we sent a referral over to legal aid and then legal aid couldn't get in contact with one of our families, and so we would help bridge that communication gap. And sometimes it's because a phone was off or something like that, and so we were able to help there. So what I'd like to do next is tell you 3 case examples, because this is all something that for us, it was hard for us to picture what this really looked like with families until we really got into working with families and doing the referrals and seeing the results. So if you go to the next slide, I can tell you one case example. This was a mother that I spoke to on the phone, and she's a single mother, and she'd experienced chronic homelessness. She had been evicted early in her adult life as a young mother, and things had kind of continued from there. When I talked to her, she was living in a home where she didn't have water and she didn't have electricity. And so one of the things that she was doing is she was pulling from the neighbor's house, pulling an electric cord or an extension cord from the neighbor's house to use the electric. And she would have to decide if she was going to use it for refrigeration or if she was going to use it for other things. And so she would switch back and forth to use her utilities. And so it wasn't really a safe place for her and her family. She had been denied for Akron metropolitan housing because at the time when she was a young mother, she had some history with our subsidized housing program. She did not have a driver's license. And she was working pretty close to her house at a dollar store, dollar type store, for a very low wage. And she had to work close to the house because of the driver's license issue. And she had mentioned, I am not really supposed to be on my feet that long. My doctor has asked me not to be on my feet that long, but I've been denied for disability twice. And she had also mentioned that she had not received any tax refunds. And so I'm listening to her, and I know that there are things that legal aid can help her with. And so when I refer the family and I write up the referral, legal aid immediately opens 5 legal cases. One of the things they're able to do is negotiate with our housing authority. They were holding a debt that was over 12 years old against the family, and they had a relationship with the housing authority that could release the obligation for that debt. The mother had big utility bills from early on in her adult life. So I'm talking like a $2,000 electric bill, right? She was not able to pay that. She also had some other debt. And so legal aid was able to help her file for bankruptcy. They were able to help her with driver's license reinstatement, and they were able to do the appeal for the disability denial, which is going to have a long-term impact on her, and it was a successful appeal. They were able to help her with taxes and get that, and so she was not getting any child tax credit. She was not getting any part of the stimulus funding or American Rescue Plan funding, and so they helped her clear that up, and she received 3 years of back tax payments. Other supports that we provided in partnership. So we had a system set up where the legal aid attorneys would meet with her weekly, and then we were providing for her kindergarten or her preschool age child a kindergarten readiness program, a partnership we had. The home visiting program would come and meet us there. We'd keep the preschooler busy, work on kindergarten readiness. We also helped with driver's ed for her older child, transportation to school, and some basic needs. And so that case blew me away, and it was one of the first cases that we worked with legal aid on how much a legal partnership can support our families. I'm going to give you 2 more examples. So next slide. So this was the family that I spoke to, with a mother in a hotel, and she was feeling very discouraged. She was working full time. She had a little baby in the hotel, and she also had an older child that was staying home from school pretty frequently because to watch the baby in the hotel room. One of the things that was most frustrating for her is she was working full time and she could not get ahead. And so not only was she paying for the hotel, but she was also experiencing a wage garnishment from a predatory car loan, a recent predatory car loan. She didn't have the car anymore, but her wages were being garnished by this. And that turned out not to be a legal way to collect those funds. She was wanting to file for bankruptcy to get out from under some of that debt. And so she was paying a local attorney $50 a month in order to get to $1,500 eventually. And then he would help her file for bankruptcy. I said, please stop doing that. We can help with this partnership. She also was getting denials when she was applying for housing because of a past eviction record, and legal aid helped with that. And so the 3 things that they were able to help with, they were able to almost immediately stop a wage garnishment. They were able to help her file for bankruptcy, and they were able to get her eviction record sealed because it was an old eviction that was affecting. We were able to help her get the child enrolled in an early Head Start program and get transportation for the older child to school. So next slide. Okay, and this last example that I wanted to talk about was it's a veteran father of 3, and we have kind of a recurring relationship with him. He struggles a little bit to stay in housing, but legal aid has been able to keep him and his kiddos in the same apartment and help consistently for 3 years, which is one of the longest times that he's been able to stay in housing. He has needed eviction representation for multiple reasons. And at the time when we first spoke to him, he didn't have custody of one of the children he was caring for. And so he had 3 kids in the home. One of them in Ohio, fathers have to file for custody if they were never married to the mother. And so they were able to help them file for custody. And so that provided a little bit more housing stability for that child, and work with him to make sure that he was eligible for our subsidized housing program, or HUD benefits. Other supports that we provided are basic needs support, internet hotspot bus passes to get dad around with the students when they needed appointments and things. And so our relationship with legal aid has been nice. They have a nice relationship with this father, and they've continued to help, and we all kind of pitch in and help them stay in housing and in-housed. And the next slide. So a little bit just about other early child partnerships that we have, since that's the focus of this panel, and what we're here to talk about today. Early Head Start and Head Start. So those are two programs that you all are familiar with, and they will take referrals from us and put those students and young children on top of wait lists because they're experiencing housing loss, or they don't have housing stability. We enroll students here in Akron Public Schools. We have an early learning program. It's typically, for typical peers, it's 2.5 hours a day. And so Head Start's usually the first option for our family because it provides more of a resource for them. And then an early learning program is another option. We have a partnership with Spark, and it's a local home visiting program for kindergarten readiness. And so that first family that I talked about, we connected her with Spark, and we used some of our ARP funds to fund a Spark representative that could carry a caseload of families who are experiencing homelessness. And that relationship and contract and partnership is still happening. And our Title 20 support that we provide for families, and so a lot of our families will qualify for housing, or I'm sorry, a child care subsidy that they could use to pay for child care. But a lot of families do not realize that if they are without housing, that we could provide a letter to them and they will get a 90-day approval for child care because they are without housing. And they don't have to be working full-time, and they don't realize that. And so that gives them time to look for full-time work, as well as it can be extended if after that 90 days the family is still without housing. We verify that for them and they're eligible for Title 20 support. And so those are some of the ways that we work with our smallest members of our families. And that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Shayna. We have some more excellent questions pouring into the Q&A box. I want to thank our participants and encourage you to keep those questions coming. But right now I want to invite in Erin Blair, who's going to talk to us about the FAIR project, and also want to acknowledge that her colleague, Ali Kiefer, has joined us today to be on hand for additional questions as well. So Erin and Ali, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Just going to talk a little bit about some of the work we're doing here in Philadelphia to meet the needs for families experiencing crises related to lack of resources, including housing. Next slide. So I just wanted to start by talking a little bit more about what maternal child health early home visiting is and how it can be a really excellent partner, especially with McKinney-Vento programs, in screening and meeting the needs of families. We know that 0 to 3 are critical years for brain development, and that early childhood trauma associated with growing up in under-resourced communities and under-resourced households can have lifelong implications. We also know that stress in pregnancy is the beginning of the cycle of a child's brain being bathed in stress hormones and chemicals that alter their brain development, and those have lasting consequences long beyond a child's 3rd birthday or a child entering kindergarten. So reaching families as early as possible in pregnancy and supporting them with these needs until their children reach school age is one of the most cost-effective ways that we're able to identify and help families connect with the resources. it's a, sorry, I lost my place. The connected, trusting relationships that home visitors develop with their families make them the perfect people to be able to screen and meet the needs that families are experiencing that they may be anxious to share with other SDOH screeners, such as their primary care physicians, et cetera. Many families with very young children hide from the systems that could support them because of fear of adverse child welfare involvement. And I think that's something that home visiting is uniquely prepared to meet and address as well. Next slide. So Philadelphia in 2015 was awarded 3 Healthy Start grants that decided to work together to form the Maternal and Infant Health Community Action Network, or the Philly Families Can. The Philly Families Can sort of underlie the work of the FAIR project by bringing together all of the maternal child health home visiting programs in Philadelphia under one roof to work together. For the Healthy Start grant, they looked towards developing a centralized intake for maternal child health home visiting programs that allowed families to call in, let the intake know what type of resources and supports they needed, and connect them with the best home visiting program for them. This was a partnership with the health department as well. And with the FAIR project, the Family Advocacy and Integrated Resources Project, we were able to integrate the resources into all of these existing home visiting programs. Because they were connected, we could easily develop a system for sharing education, creating a referral system, all of those things that will allow us to work seamlessly together, as well as resource sharing and information between the programs. We know that our families are sometimes our best and most resourced folks and let us know about stuff. And it's so great to be able to have a network of home visiting teams sharing with each other across different programs. So next slide. The history of the FAIR project. So the National Nurse-Led Care Consortium had been working with a legal partnership, Help MLP, for about 8 years, providing legal services and supports to families. Shanna's excellent, just did an excellent job of basically doing 3 case studies that sounded almost exactly like case studies from our own families when we started having civil legal aid partners. It was such an overwhelming support for our home visitors as well. Like, we suddenly had people that were able to respond to the needs we were identifying when we were doing these SDOH screenings, right? For the first time. So in 2022, then during the pandemic, we were lucky to get some funds to start a family support fund that works with our legal partners to be able to meet the financial needs that are identified. And partnering together has allowed us to really bolster the supports we're able to provide to families and have longer lasting impacts on those families, because eviction defense alone, when non-payment is the primary reason for eviction, does not go very far in preventing an eviction, or it can change how the eviction looks on paper, but non-payment is not an illegal reason for eviction, we all know. So in 2022, we won a $5.4 million grant to expand these legal services and home visiting to all of the home visiting programs under the Philly Families Can, and bring those partners together. It began with a 6-month planning period. And we began providing direct services to home visitors and their families February 1st of 2023. So we're just about to roll into our second year. Next slide. Kind of show what some of the unmet legal needs families experience are. I think Shanna also did a really great job of bringing up a lot of these unmet needs that we see. And really, these needs are inextricably linked. And I think one thing that we know is when a family has one unmet need, it can cascade into all of these needs. And I think Shanna sort of highlighted that in her case example of a family that lost a driver's license, then lost housing, then lost, and it's just this sort of cascade of events where meeting that need early on, identifying it, and getting that driver's license back could prevent all that further cascade. And I think that's one of the really beautiful things about integrating that screening and referral practice for identifying those unmet legal needs. So next slide. The goals of the FAIR project are really to expand and sustain the resources and supports that we've been providing with NNCC to all of those home visiting families and meet their holistic needs. Sorry, I lost my place again. So increasing, I think one of the areas I really wanted to focus on, because I really think the underlying partnership of all of these home visiting programs is sort of the secret sauce to this working really well, but increasing the advocacy capacity of our home visitors has really been one of the most excellent parts of this program. So not only do we provide civil legal aid services to the families directly, we also provide direct education in screening, identifying, and triaging civil legal aid needs or other financial needs, et cetera, that home visitors see day to day. As a former home visitor, I can say that the crises families experience very often interrupt the ability to deliver the home visiting services model goals. And so being able to see and triage those needs and hand them to a trusted, like warm handoff partner that you know will respond rapidly, appropriately, with the same level of care and kindness that your home visiting program responds with, is a really excellent way to ensure that referral partnership increases the trusting relationship between the home visitor and the family rather than taking away from it. And through all of these services, we really hope to just increase family stability and resolve unmet financial, social, and legal needs. The other thing about the long-term relationships that home visitors develop with their families is it allows home visitors are so trusted that families are sharing with them throughout the time that they participate. And very often those smaller needs can be identified in the pipeline by a home visitor long before the family may even identify that as a potential risk or need they're going to experience. So getting in there and meeting those needs before they develop into those crises is something that home visitors are really well positioned to do. Next slide. This just kind of breaks down a little bit of the structure of the supports that we provide. So on the legal side, we have client attorneys, managing attorneys, paralegals, referrals partners, and legal students. Whereas the public health side, we have our public health nurses, home visitors, our advisory committee, our fund management and administration team, and our project leadership staff. Next slide. Underlying that structure of the actual deliverable model that we're integrating into those home visiting services was this advisory council that really brought about the ability for us to bring the FAIR project to all of these home visiting programs. And I think some of the most important things are that our member organizations are participating. We have people with lived experience that guide us and help us to best understand how to serve and meet people's needs. Our home visitors participate as well in informing us on the lives of their families. Our home visitors really get to see things in a very different light because they're in people's lives for a long time and they're in people's homes. So making sure that they have a voice on this advisory council in how we deliver our services ensures that we're meeting families where they're at and with the same level of kindness and compassion as the home visiting programs themselves. They're also able to help us identify trends that we're starting to see with new unmet needs that are popping up. Maybe there's a policy change or something like that, or an office is closed, or like families are no longer able to reach somebody. Those are all the other things that our home visiting partners are able to share with us that we may not realize. Next slide. The goal of the Family Support Fund is to provide low barrier, rapid response to financial supports to families. I think a lot of us on this call recognize that the way many of the financial supports that are out there and exist at the state and federal level require families to already be in crisis in order to meet those needs. I think that meaningful financial supports need to recognize what families' needs will be before the families have those needs. So requiring somebody to have an eviction notice in hand in order to be able to get eviction funds actually creates a system where families have increased evictions, right? Because that eviction filing is going to be on their record. Unless you're in a state where you have eviction record sealing, reach out to me if you've succeeded at that. It's still going to create the same barriers to future housing that no filing at all would have. So we really like to recognize that small amount of support up front and quickly can make a huge difference in the long run. Having the fund management by a like somebody with extensive home visiting experience and healthcare experience allows to really have a better and deeper understanding of how a small financial need might lead to bigger health consequences down the road. Also the partnership with a legal team really decreases the amount of funds that we are giving out. So the legal team is able to work with utility programs. They're able to work with all of these other supports that meet the underlying needs that led to a family's financial need in the first place. And very often we will get like a referral for an $11,000 water bill. And by the time our legal team is done with that $11,000 water bill, it is a $0 water bill. And so we're very fiscally conscientious in having our legal partnership sort of looking at all of the needs that come through and addressing them in any additional ways that we can prior to putting funds out there. One of the other things that I really appreciate about the design of our Family Support Fund in eviction prevention and housing stability is that we really follow our family's heart's desire. And so we may have an unlicensed landlord that a family has a really positive, healthy relationship with. There's no way that they would qualify for state or federal funds without that license, but we know it's safe housing and we let the family determine how they'd like their funds to be spent. And we're able to look towards ways of meeting that need and preserving that relationship, because we know the loss of that housing means that family is going to be struggling for years to regain that stability that was lost. Next slide. Jumping into the numbers. I know we're running out of time here. In 1 year, we've had 1,125 legal matters that have come across our desk. 46% of them were related to housing and utilities. And one thing that I'll say is, like, yes, 46% of them were related to housing and utilities, but so many of our other referrals that were for benefits or referrals for our family support fund, et cetera, were related to the outcomes of lost housing, right? So the family is experiencing discrimination related to their housing status that requires legal services that may not show up as that 46%, but are 100% related to housing security. Next slide. This is just a quick look at what are legal matters, what areas they fell into. As you can see, 517 housing eclipses out many of the other things that we're seeing. But when you see like 517, but 204 personal and family stability referrals are often related to housing needs as well. So next slide. Just to paint a picture of what that looks like. You see that legal status is only 2% of the referrals that we receive. We actually have external legal partners that specialize in immigration related issues. And generally, we're providing warm handoffs to experts in different areas when the capacity of our own team is not specialized in that area. So sometimes with some of them, we may see a lot more referrals related to those issues, but we're not handling them or opening them as cases in our own office. Next slide. We had 243 families receive financial assistance. As you can see, that housing was a lot of the funds that we provided over the last year, but I think it's really important to remember that there's so many additional financial burdens associated with the loss of secure housing. And I think that we think about safe sleep, for example. When a family loses all their beds, when they lose all of their safe sleeping surfaces and their couch surfing, even when they regain housing, if they don't have the financial ability to get all of those things back into their lives that they lost through eviction or lost through housing loss, that can be a significant barrier to health and safety of families as well. Families also often lose their benefits related directly to their loss of housing. So they go to the county assistance office and receive misinformation such as, we can't give you SNAP because you don't have an address, which I think better partnerships between McKinney-Vento organizations and county assistance offices to ensure that the rights of families are being monitored and enforced, as well as improved education of county assistance office workers to really understand the rights of families, as well as our early learning resources to understand the rights of families. I think Shanna was talking about 90 days of childcare assistance that you're eligible for through the McKinney-Vento. We try to enforce that regularly. Our legal teams are often the only folks that can get the Early Learning Resource Center to actually abide by that very known policy. We know the policy, but not all the workers do. And I think that's an important thing to recognize, as well as the advocacy capacity of having civil legal aid folks recognizing when there's patterns and addressing them at those higher levels. I'm not going to read the numbers off. You can, next slide. See here what the things that we were covering. Also love, we're able to occasionally cover moving costs, right? Not just the moving cost of moving into new housing after the loss of housing, or moving into safe housing when there's lead identified, or moving into adulthood and getting housing for the first time for yourself as a parent is something that we frequently have. But we're also able to address like getting that household set up. It's really nice to send a welcome package to a family so that they can sit at a dining room table and eat a meal together that they prepared at home because they had the things they needed to do that. And so often when families are housing insecure, they're losing so much more than housing, right? And we all know that. So I'm going to say next slide, and I think that's time for me.
Thank you so much, Erin, for that excellent information. I want to encourage our participants to continue submitting your questions in the Q&A panel. Before I turn to your questions, I'm going to invite in my colleague, TJ Lucas, to give us an update on pending federal legislation that addresses this topic we've been discussing today.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Aaron mentioned, my name is TJ Lucas, and I'm the Senior Manager for Federal Policy at SchoolHouse Connection. I am so excited to tell you about an upcoming legislative effort that is bipartisan and that will be introduced in the Senate by Senators Michael Bennet, a Democrat from Colorado, and Senator Todd Young, a Republican from Indiana. It is called the Eviction Crisis Act. This will do three major things. It will expand the use of community courts and social services representatives for tenants. That looks like providing one-time support to get tenants back on their feet and increase legal representation for all tenants. Additionally, it would create a permanent program funded at $3 billion annually to provide rental assistance and housing stability services to low-income households and to help them avoid evictions. 75% of those funds will be dedicated to vulnerable tenants to apply for one-time financial assistance. And finally, it will improve data and analysis on evictions by establishing a national database to standardize data and track evictions. It will establish a federal advisory committee on eviction research, and it will increase funding to study evictions. If you would like to get involved and help spread the word, please sign up to SchoolHouse Connections e-news. And once it is introduced, we will let you know how you can be supportive. But the name of the game is to get co-sponsors. So we will ask everyone to reach out to their members of Congress once this legislation is reintroduced.
Thank you so much, TJ. Thank you to our amazing panel today. And I'm going to ask you to be on standby as we start to dig into some of the excellent questions that we've received. First, want to thank our participants for sharing. I want to acknowledge that I think it looks like both Carl and Shayna and some members of the SchoolHouse team have already been feverishly typing in some responses. And I want to go to you first, Carl, and give you the opportunity to say or call out anything out loud that has come in that you think is worth noting for our audience.
Oh, geez. Now I need to go through all those questions that I answered.
That's okay. We can come back to you. I will say
Okay.
I did notice there were a couple of questions about data on racial disparities and racial makeup and how you extracted some of the data and how you extracted some of the data on how you knew there were children living in households that had been evicted. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that piece of it.
Yes, all of this was only possible because of our partnership with the United States Census. So an eviction filing will usually just list the modal filing only has one name on it, right? The head of household. So if we just scraped the names from all the records that we collect, we would not be able to learn very much about who lives in those houses. What we did is we took that name and we were able to link it to census records. And then we were able to look at all of the people who lived in a household with that one name that was listed on the filing. Then we're able to use the decennial census data to learn about the race, the income, the age, the gender of all of the other household members of that one name that was listed on the filing. So that was a huge task, and that's why this like really basic descriptive research was only accomplished in late 2023.
That's super helpful. Thank you so much. I also want to acknowledge we have received a number of questions about a recording and copy of these slides, and I will reassure our audience you will receive via email follow-up a recording of this webinar, a copy of these slides, and we'll ask for your feedback on this conversation today. I'm going to start with what I think is an easy question. The question says, can we reach out to FAIR Project directly? And that came from an advocate in Philadelphia. And I will say, we'll put up contact information at the end, but Aaron or Allie, if there's anything you want to add to that about communicating with you.
Anyone is welcome to reach out to us. Please use our contact information if you have questions, thoughts, ideas, or new partnerships, things like that. We love to chat.
Excellent.
Yeah, I will give a caveat to that currently our grant funding through the William Penn Foundation is a pilot, and it's very specifically directed to home visit programs through the Philly Families Can. So if you're in Philadelphia and you have families that could use these services today, refer to Philly Families Can, and we'll be able to support there, but would love to talk about, what the future looks like and how we could bridge that connection.
Thank you for that. I want to go to two questions that are specifically related to the American Rescue Plan Homeless Children and Youth Funds that Shana is utilizing and walked us through in Akron. The first question I want to address from SchoolHouse's perspective, and then a second question, I'm going to put Shana on the spot about sustaining those programs that you've provided through ARP HCY funding. So the first question asks, can you provide any guidance on applying for the ARP funds? Are these available to nonprofits supporting individuals experiencing homelessness? It's a great question. These funds were released to both state education agencies and to local education agencies. The U.S. Department of Education, in their guidance and Dear Colleague letters, has strongly encouraged partnering with community-based organizations in order to use these funds to support children and youth experiencing homelessness. I would also like to remind our audience that early childhood development programs qualify as community-based organizations. And so we hear a lot of examples from school districts who have successfully used these funds to partner with early Head Start, home visiting providers, childcare providers. And that is exactly what these funds are intended to do under the umbrella of school readiness for our birth to 5 not yet school age children. You can find more information about American Rescue Plan funds on the SchoolHouse website. Our team has also put some links into the chat. We have a 2-page overview of these funds, and we also have a series called Flexing the Flexibility of ARP HCY, including a special call out on how you can use these funds to partner with your early childhood providers. And now, Shana, I want to come to you because I saw a question come in asking, the things you've been able to do with these funds are wonderful and great. What happens when these funds run out? Because they do have to be obligated by this September and liquidated by next January. So would love to invite you in to talk about how you're thinking about what's next.
Sure. So the 3 contracts that we're using with community agencies, there were prior existing relationships with all 3 agencies. And so one of the examples that I gave was Legal Aid. I also talked a little bit about Spark, which is our early childhood provider. And there was a prior relationship with them, and they're an existing program here in our community. And so they have always accepted referrals. What this did is provide a seamless process. It provided a relationship between us and them. It also provided more staff capacity, so they were able to take on more of our families. So what existed before will continue to exist, but part of the conversation at each of the initiations of each program was what will happen after. We have this funding, the funding's limited, this is what the funding is intended for, and all three conversations talked about data. So one of the things we'll do as this funding is closing is that we'll collect some of that, and we'll have some proof and some data that says this is what we were able to do with these funding. These families were able to permanently remove barriers to housing, and that will allow these families to become housed on a long-term basis. That's what we're hoping to see, and we're hoping that as an initiative to then gain funding or ongoing funding from other sources, other grant resources. When you're applying for grants initially, what they like to see is data, and this allowed us a period of data collection and allowed us a period to say, hey, this is what can help families. And so that's what we're hoping. We're hoping to continue and look for other sources of funding, but we know that the relationship that existed prior will continue.
Thank you so much for that. There's a couple more things I want to acknowledge that have come into the chat and Q&A box, and then I want to turn back to Aaron and Allie to talk a little bit more about some questions that have come in about the FAIR project. Someone asked how you can find out if this funding is available in your community. For American Rescue Plan, homeless children and youth funds in particular, we encourage you to reach out to your state McKinney-Vento coordinator or your local school district homeless education liaison, whoever your version of Shana is in your community. They will know, and they will have the budget for those funds and be able to tell you how they are utilizing those funds. And that could be an opportunity for a conversation around serving infants and toddlers in particular. Another question that came in that Shana beautifully answered, but I want to provide a national perspective, is Shana mentioned that families experiencing homelessness have 90 days in Akron to access childcare in particular. Your state has a policy or policies and procedures regarding extensions and waivers for children experiencing homelessness in particular through their childcare plans. Some states like Ohio offer 90 days for families experiencing homelessness to submit documentation like birth certificate, immunization records, etc. Other states offer 30. I've seen 2 states who offer up to 180 days. It is critical if you are working with families with children to know and be aware of what your state offers so that you can help those families advocate. Shana mentioned a waiver for work requirements. That is a common challenge we hear from families experiencing homelessness. They cannot work until they have childcare. And so many states recognize that and offer waivers for that. So Schoolhouse Connection has a summary of those provisions and policies, and we will be releasing an updated one in March, so stay tuned. But now I want to go back to Aaron and Allie. We had a really great question come in, and I'm going to have to read it verbatim so that I get all the contours and meaning behind it. This participant said, I was intrigued by Aaron's comment that we should make sure we can identify families' needs before they become a crisis. For example, requiring individuals to have an eviction notice in hand before accessing cash assistance may actually increase the rate of eviction. So Aaron, can you provide us with other well-intentioned but counterintuitive or counterproductive program eligibility requirements that may backfire and increase the rate of eviction?
One thing that I think is really, we see over and over and over again, especially with our families experiencing housing instability, is a lack of vital documents. And requirements, extensive requirements for vital document proof from systems that already have worked with families over the course of many, many years, oftentimes is the reason a family doesn't get the support that they need, right? It can take 3 months to iron out all the kinks to get vital documents back in hand sometimes. And by then the eviction's already occurred, right? And having an Office of Homeless Services that says, sorry, we can't move forward with providing funds until we have birth certificates for everyone in the household means that essentially that hearing is 3 weeks away, a month away. They're not going to have the documents in time. But I think that there's some really good solutions possible. First off, I think looking at other systems as being able to verify somebody's identity in situations like that should be good enough to get the supports that somebody needs to prevent a further crisis, right? Office of Homeless Services is regularly saying we have too many people at our doorstep. We can't possibly meet all of these needs. But when they have antiquated policies that increase instability, it leads to more people at their doorstep. So let's look at the agencies we're able to connect with them and identify those things so that we can actually do something about them. That's just one area. I mean, I think everyone on this call knows that the Welfare to Work program is a nightmare. TANF has been rendered pretty much useless in supporting people's long-term needs, at least in the state of Pennsylvania. If you're in a state where it's more than $316 per month, let me know how you fix that. It's really, really difficult when our social safety nets have been undermined. For example, having a Department of Labor policies attached to TANF that basically incentivize underemployment of vulnerable people, right? So employment is one of the biggest pieces of solving our housing crisis, is meaningful money coming in. And when we have active policies that undermine that goal built into the system, that's something that has to be addressed in order to actually meet the underlying need.
Thank you so much for that. I'm mindful of time. I want to provide some closing reminders, announcements, and slides. I want to thank our presenters today. You all are amazing. The work you have done and continue to do is very meaningful and impactful. I want to encourage our audience, if you want to continue conversations like this, great news. SHC has created a Slack community just for you and for these conversations. We encourage you to use the bit.ly link or the QR code to sign up. Slack is very easy to use, and we want to keep these conversations going. Schoolhouse Connection, as I mentioned earlier, also has a scholarship program. You can see information here about the deadline to apply. We encourage you, if you work with older students who are experiencing homelessness, please do make sure you share this information with them so that they can receive all the supports possible. We have another webinar coming up on leveraging ARP HCY funds to empower students experiencing homelessness through community agency partnerships. So we hope you'll check that out. It's also on our upcoming webinars page where you can register and sign up and be on the lookout for more information about that. You can find us on all of these platforms, and we hope that you will reach out and connect to us. You can also sign up for our e-newsletter, which we send out about once a week and includes highlights like today's webinar and conversation and resources that we continue to develop that we hope will be useful to you all. I'm going to leave up our presenter contact information if folks want to take note. Just another reminder that you will receive a recording of today's webinar and a copy of these slides in your inboxes shortly. And the last thing I want to say is another heartfelt thank you to Carl, Shayna, Aaron, and Allie for everything you do, for giving us 75 minutes of your precious and valuable time today to talk about the work that you're doing. And I know for certain, based on our questions and our comments, that our audience really learned some things that they can put into immediate action in their community. So thank you. Thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful afternoon.